The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 13th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. So, just the other week was the 2022 church-wide assembly, and it was in Columbus, Ohio, which I consider very boring. But the next one in 2025 is in Phoenix. And when they announced that, I immediately thought, Arizona birds. And then I thought, you know, really, the whole assembly should take a break and go look at birds in between sessions. It would be good for everyone. It would give everyone a chance to relax and be restored, and then probably go back and make much better decisions. Now, I know that would not work. The logistics would be a nightmare, and plenty of people would not find it restful. Birds are my relaxing thing. They aren't for everyone. But just thinking that through helps me to relate to the leaders in that synagogue in today's reading. They don't mean to completely misinterpret God's command to honor the Sabbath. They're not aiming to turn the day of rest into a day of religious obligation. They're not trying to turn a blessing into one more thing you have to do. They're just trying to take God's commands seriously. And I would bet that, like me with the birds, they know what works for them to honor the Sabbath, and they just want for everyone to have that experience. And then this woman shows up, and just by being there, she's already a problem for them. Nobody wants to be reminded of the suffering in the world on the Sabbath. This is supposed to be a break. Doesn't she get that? They're hoping maybe no one will notice, but no. Jesus sees her. Jesus calls her over, and he helps her. And the leader of the synagogue flies right off the handle. Yes, of course, helping the woman look looks like a good thing, but not today, because today's the Sabbath and God said not to work. God made the earth in 6 days and rested on the Sabbath. Do you really think you need less rest than God? Do all the miracles you like tomorrow. God said not to work today. That settles it. But of course, that's not all that God said. Because God rested on the Sabbath day isn't the only reason for the Sabbath. There's another reason explained in the book of Deuteronomy. Just before the people enter the promised land, they remember how God has been teaching them how to live as free people. They remember that God gave them laws to help them learn how to not act like they are still enslaved in Egypt. One of those laws is the command about the Sabbath. They are to honor the seventh day, the day of rest, not just because God said so, but in order to remember that they were once enslaved. You know what enslaved people don't get? They don't get a day off. So God teaches them to honor the Sabbath, not just for themselves, but for everyone. You get a day of rest. Your children get a day of rest. Your workers get a day of rest. The praise team gets a day of rest. Oh, look, that's happening. Everyone gets a day of rest because you're not enslaved. Because God has set you free. So the Sabbath is most of all a day for being free. The gift isn't a list of rules, a giant list of no's, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. It's about God saying yes. It's about God setting free all who are bound, whether it is by work or slavery or illness or sin or anything. In fact, the Sabbath is probably the best day to help the woman, because by helping her, Jesus sets her free. The crowd at the synagogue seems to get that, because they just keep on rejoicing. We don't know what happens with the synagogue leader, but maybe he gets to admit that he was wrong and join the rejoicing. Maybe he's set free from his own captivity, whether it is to an overly narrow reading of the law or a need to always be right. And as for us, what do we need to be set free from? Maybe like the woman, we struggle with an illness or injury, or maybe like many disabled people today, our real problem is simply that the world isn't designed with us in mind. Maybe we desperately need to hear that we are children of Abraham, children of God. Maybe we're also bound by the stress and fatigue of our work, and we desperately need rest, and not just one day of it either. Maybe like the leader, we are bound by expectations. Maybe we're bound by an incomplete understanding of God's story that causes us to try to limit God's love. Or maybe we're just trying so hard to be faithful that we get ourselves all tied up in knots. Maybe, like the crowds at that synagogue, we're not entirely sure what's going on, but we long for a reason to rejoice. Maybe, after all, we're captive to sin and can't save ourselves. Maybe we also need someone to set us free. Sometimes the gift of the Sabbath means that, yeah, your workers get a day of rest too. And sometimes it means that, yeah, your donkey gets a drink of water. Sometimes it means that, yes, your sins are forgiven. Sometimes it means that, yes, you can take a break and look at birds. Sometimes it means that, yes, you will go to church today because that's what we do in this family. Sometimes it means that, yes, your pastor takes a different day off because Sunday is a work day. Sometimes being set free means the freedom to acknowledge the pain of the past. History will continue to trap us as long as we pretend it doesn't affect us. Remembering the past rightly is the first step toward learning to live as free people in the present and the future. That is also a gift of the Sabbath. Whatever the gift of the Sabbath means for you today, Jesus is still here in our midst, still proclaiming, you are set free. So in his name, all God's people say, Amen.